Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Driven Wyld. Today we are talking about, is tipping culture actually out of control? So one of the things we hear about way too often is how tipping culture is out of control and we are so entitled as gig workers. And while we can make arguments for literal days on the subject, 9 out of 10 times it's not going to make it through the skulls of those people. But here's the thing. They aren't necessarily wrong either. This may lead to some of the hottest takes I've ever had on the gig economy, and tipping specifically. So with that said, I want to go over what tipping was, what tipping is today, if it is actually out of hand, and everything in between. But before we do that, let's go over a quick disclaimer. The content of this video does not contain, it's never intended to be, legal, business, financial, tax, or health advice of any kind. This video is for entertainment purposes only. It is advised that you conduct your own research, you consult with qualified professionals before applying anything you find online. So with that said, let's get started. What tipping was. Tipping may date back to the Roman era, but most sources trace it back to medieval Europe, when wealthy visitors to homes would leave tips for servants who provided good service, hence the term gratuity. However, the word tip actually dates to the 17th century when London taverns and coffee houses put signs saying, "To ensure promptitude," alongside boxes or bowls where customers could leave an extra coin for faster service. Which a lot of people leave this tidbit out, referring to its origins, and for obvious reasons. Also, for all of those who are like, tipping is such an American thing, because you're from the UK and you have nothing better to do than to hop on my videos and complain. You made it yourselves. And just like your colonies, we took it and made it our own.
Ooh, you went there!
It wasn't until the mid-1800s where it made its way into the US to mimic European customs and implement a way to not pay their workers. Okay, let's be real for a second. All companies want to find a way to pay us less and less, so that's not a new concept overall. So the fact that people who were running companies saw it and used it opportunistically, what else is new? In fact, when minimum wage was introduced in 1996, the Tipped Wage Parity Act made an exception for those who worked for tips, and unsurprisingly hasn't gone up on a federal level since. In fact, 16 states kept it at the same federal rate, and others have implemented their own guidelines per county even. So it's not like nothing is being done, but it's just not enough to say it's a living without tips, you know? But that can also be said about a lot of jobs. However, at some point, people came accustomed to the lifestyle and even found that they made more in tips than most jobs are willing to pay them themselves. Because let's be honest, if they could pay us less, they would. Sure, there were days where you barely made minimum wage, but there were also days where you blew those numbers away in such a short period of time. Even those who had mid-status jobs and degrees weren't keeping up income-wise. Not to mention days where people get unbelievable tips from very kind-hearted customers. Like, I remember going to a taco craft, and the to-go girl didn't actually put my order in because she was in such shock and awe that she got a $200 tip. Then people saw that and thought, maybe we should get in on this. What tipping is today. Okay, let's be real. There isn't anything necessarily wrong about opening up an opportunity for yourself. If you want to have a tip jar, that's fine. But no one carries cash with them anymore. Right, so when you check out, you're prompted with a gratuity screen, which you could say no to, but there have been certain factors that make it hard to do so. First, there's the concept of social pressure. When people receive the check and you choose not to tip, you feel rather uncomfortable with how others view you, which works in the favor of the waiter or waitress who's making $2.13 an hour, but when that stupid tablet flips around and they're looking deeply into your eyes, waiting for you to choose an option, even though they're not making a tipped wage, they're making at least minimum wage, and you just feel the pressure anyway. Which is why a lot of people start to build a tolerance for saying no over time and not caring about what other people think. A lot of people are referring to it as tip fatigue, which on one hand, good for you for building boundaries boundaries, but damn, does it affect everyone else who actually uses tips for an income. Second, we need to talk about how loosely the word tip has become over time. Because one can make the argument for years on whether or not a tip is to ensure prompt service or if it's a gratuity for quality service, what have you. But in reality, it's become so much more. It's a bid for service on food delivery apps. It's a bribe to have you see it at your table first, or a bribe to your mechanic to skip your car to the front of the line. It's a literal living for people who dance on a pole or show off their body online, or even street performers just showing magic tricks or something, which is a way for them to make money while pursuing the life they want to live. It is a feature in a live stream that people engage with on NPC streams on TikTok. And Twitch streaming for gamers is a request from self-serve kiosks that no one is serving you at all at, let's say, Crumble Cookies. Like, who am I tipping? Myself? Sure, I'll take 100% refund on the cookies that I am putting in the work to put the order in for. But the worst I have seen, and I mean the worst I have seen, is when tips are forced. And no, not because of the people that can't be trusted to tip their servers. That makes sense that way, especially for higher end restaurants. I'm talking about when it's weaponized in such a way just to exploit laws that normally have limits on how much you can charge somebody, but then force the gratuity to raise the price and get around laws, such as, I don't know, rental laws.
All right, thanks for paying your rent this month. Go ahead and sign here. It's just going to ask you a couple of questions.
A tip? I'm not tipping my landlord.
So you'll tip a barista who pours overpriced coffee into a cup, but not the guy who's on call 24/7 to make sure you have a safe home?
I'm not tipping you. This isn't a restaurant.
Okay, so you'll tip an extra 25% for somebody to carry you a basket of chicken wings, but you won't tip someone who responds for after-hours emergency calls? Yep. Well, I guess when it's time for your lease renewal, I'm going to make sure gratuity is included in your rent.
Okay, I'll hold them, you kick the crap out of them. Finally! The landlord isn't on call 24/7 to make sure I have a safe home. In fact, there are so many landlords that don't actually fix the problems in their own place. You can actually say, hey, they're delaying some of our repairs for like months. There are some people who call their landlord like, hey, my shower head is still leaking and I asked you to fix that a couple of weeks ago. What's up? And they said they'll get to it when they get to it. So the reality is that's just some BS to get around laws and to make sure that they're exploiting you for as much money as possible. Because everyone is asking, there are a bunch of people that are just like, yeah, I'm not tipping anybody. And there's a lot of times where that includes people that actually need tips to survive. Because once upon a time, you have a job in college, you can get a job as a waiter, waitress, bartender, what have you. And you can live on that. But if people are just not tipping anymore, that's going to be a huge issue long term. And third is the practices in terms of illegal activity and just stupid practices with tips overall. Tip theft from management, gig apps, and even some restaurants. Tip pooling, which is where they take all the tips, pool them together, and distribute them amongst the waiters or waitresses, which works fine in some places, but not for others. Tip fronting, which is lying about the price for an order and claiming the order got smaller when it didn't. That's something that Delivered does. They just wanted the order accepted, so they made it look like it was a bigger valued order, and then the price of the order dropped. Tip baiting, exclusive to some gig apps and borders on theft, even though it actually is theft. That's something that some gig companies allow for, and some people even try that in the comment section. Tipping out when it comes to not getting tipped. So when a waiter or waitress doesn't actually get tipped, they still have to tip out the busboy and everyone else. Let's say a waiter or waitress actually serves somebody who ordered $100 worth of food. They leave without tipping. They still have to tip out the busboy 5%. That's $5 out of their pocket, which in tipped wage, that's more than 2 hours worth of work, assuming no one else is tipping them in the meantime. And then there's pocket change tipping, which is just insulting. 25 cents, pennies, etc. And you know those people just suck as a whole. How this affects gig workers. Here's the thing. We've always had issues with no-tip customers, especially with the introduction of contactless delivery, which removes the social pressure because you never actually get to see the person you're screwing over. Not to mention with how people don't want to understand our business model is vastly different than waiters or waitresses, yet they still feel this undying need to compare them to us. And everybody and their mother is too stupid to actually take the time to actually learn. Or you tell them exactly what the issue is, but it just goes in one ear and out the other. Which on one hand is fine, we can still just say no to those orders, no harm, no foul, but some areas have become so bad they just cannot use gig apps profitably anymore. Not on a full-time capacity and not even on a part-time basis in some areas. Do we want this to change? Here's the reality. There's a lot of people who are questioning whether there needs to be some kind of change for this. For customers, I think that they always want to say that they want to change, but in reality, that will only make the prices go up for the order. And studies have shown if a customer is charged $18 for a pizza and gives a $7 tip, they don't feel as ripped off as being charged $25 for the pizza. If they say otherwise and rather be charged more, they are simply miserable people who can't stand the idea of somebody else being paid more, and you shouldn't have to appease those people anyway. These are the people who hate their lives so much they have to bring you down to make themselves feel and look better. These are the people who would rather gaslight and manipulate you because they would rather be right in their own minds than let anyone else have an ounce of success apart from them. Now, what about the people who are a part of tipping culture? I think there does need to be some regulation on an enforceable level, especially in the restaurant industry where tip theft and wage theft are actually a little too high right now, in my opinion. There does need to be a certain level of enforcement on that subject. Employment lawyers are going to make points on their podcasts about this, but when it actually comes to going to court, they seem to forget what it means to actually be an employment lawyer, and then they just ghost the people who are looking for their help and refusing their cases because they don't have the means to actually fight them. Although what I think we really need is to educate those people onto how to properly protect themselves as a guide and how to protect yourself from shady management, as well as what they need to provide lawyers in order to actually fight the companies in question. Not just say you provide the service on a website and then just never get back to them. Like seriously, what's the point of saying you work on contingency if you don't actually tell them what you need in order to take their case? Also, there are some practices that shouldn't be allowed either. Why should the busboy be tipped out when he went home early? Why should landlords skirt the system and force a gratuity on their tenants? Why should waiters, waitresses, and pizza delivery people be expected to do other tasks around the store when the pay doesn't constitute for anything other than serving and delivering? Why should kiosks with no one in attendance have a tipping option? But with the same respect, there does need to be certain practices in place as well. First of all, there have been some restaurants with their own drivers and their own staff that have been doing deliveries that have refused service for customers who choose not to tip their tippable wage staff, which personally I think is awesome. Why don't you just make a mandatory tipping system? That could work in some areas, and some higher end restaurants have already implemented that specifically. But here's the thing, I don't want to serve everyone. I want to serve people who treat me with respect. People who don't lie or manipulate facts to best suit their narrative. People who appreciate our work for them and understand that they are receiving a service from us. A mandatory tip will just make it harder for us to determine who is who. And for gig workers, that can really be detrimental because we get ratings, people report that they never receive the order, and other things of that nature. And also cause wrongful deactivations, which changes their overall income. Second, I think people in leadership positions really need to get some leadership skills that actually make sense. Not just some very sucky manager who abuses their people and violates boundaries, pushing legal boundaries that they should not be pushing at all. All for the sake of management and making people do what they want. And finally, we need to teach people who are in tippable positions now not to depend on their activity long term. I'll go over that in a bit. Unionizing and mention striking. I know there's always the argument of we chose this, if you don't like it, don't work there, take it up with your boss, and the amount of people who are going to mention striking and unionizing is unbelievable. Because one, it is bad advice for various reasons mentioned already. Two, the people who have a problem with tipping culture as a whole are customers more than that of workers on a general level. Three, let's say you win, and the result is not so financially devastating for all parties involved. Now you go back to the people who you had a problem with in general, and have that bittersweet feeling of we didn't get everything we asked for, and we have to go back to the people who would pay us less if they could.
That sounds like a very dangerous idea that could very easily backfire.
While you can make a living on gig apps and other tipping opportunities, that doesn't mean you should. Like I said, the gig economy is an income bridge to what would be a long-term goal, not the goal. And not just because of the industry or the fact that it's tips or whatever. It's because of the fragility of accounts and the overall concept that you should not be working in a way that makes you money because of your activity. You should find a way that makes money that is independent of your activity. Whether that's investing in the stock market or some business model, real estate. But this way you never have to be concerned about your financial well-being. And this goes for any job, gig, or whatever. Being a gig worker or really any kind of job without that kind of exit strategy makes for a very feast or famine lifestyle, and that's not good for anybody. So if you have a problem with the way you are living right now, start working on making some changes in your life. You're the one that determines your future at the end of the day, and what is best for you and your financial future, not to appease anybody else. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, and as always, stay wild.